Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Glenn Thayer.
Hello, hello. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How you doing this month? How you doing? Good, good, good. That is a good thing. Because you know what? Welcome to the Big Ideas Theater. We've had over the last few days, we have been privileged to hear from thought leaders from so many different diverse fields. I mean, we've had astrophysics to emotional AI. And in this session, we're going to dive a little into neuroscience. So you're going to notice that this is a Wi-Fi free zone, okay? Some people are like, it's buffering, it's not working. That's right. We want you to unplug. We want you to think big. And we don't want you to be worried about anything else that's outside of the Big Ideas Theater. Now, for this session, we're going to be using the catch box. Now, this is a throwable microphone, as you see right here. Amy's going to be taking questions throughout the entire session. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We got a few of these great folks that are in the green shirts here. They will toss the microphone to you. Stand up, hold it right here, ask your question. And then when you're done with the question, just throw it back. Simple, easy peasy. Got it? Sweet. All right. Well, speaking of questions, when was the last time that you had an aha moment? This morning. And what did it feel like? Pretty good, right? Right? You know, rush of energy, you know, maybe a slight tingling, urgency to do something about it, right? Something like that. Maybe it's like a list of side effects in pharmaceutical ad, right? A rush of energy, maybe slight tingling, mild euphoria, excitement, urgency to do something about it. Well, you know what? Our next speaker is going to share with us not only what's behind that moment, but how we can set up the environment for our brains to generate more of them and more quality ideas and ahas. Now, she's the CEO of Peak Teams, a leadership development company combining adventure and neuroscience to inspire performance. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Amy Posey.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, 4 people in the front row. I appreciate that. So thanks, Glenn, for the introduction. This is my colleague, Tabitha Studley. She'll be doing some fun doodles while we're here today. But today is not about me or Tabitha. Today is about all of us. So what I'd like you to do, like Glenn said, I work for a company called Peak Teams. I'm the CEO. And what I'd like to do today is start us out with some connections. I see that you've strategically placed yourself just far enough away from the strangers next to you to, be comfortable and good, so that's good. But I want to mix it up a little bit. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to take 2 minutes. What I'd like you to do is stand up because I got the coveted after lunch spot. I'd like you to stand up. I'd like you to go find somebody in the room next to you, in your row, whatever. And what I'd like you to do is answer this question with each other. Tell a little story. What I'd like you to do is share with that person, connect with them, introduce yourself, and share what's the thing over the last 12 months that you're most proud of. Just one thing. Think of one thing, personally, professionally. Think about the one thing that you're most proud of from the last 12 months. So I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock. Go ahead, everybody, get up, stretch your legs, connect with somebody in your row, in front of you, behind you, make a connection, say hello. What you're most proud of. For those of you just joining us, we're connecting and sharing the one thing we're most proud of from the last 12 months. So connect with somebody that's in your row, jump in, have a conversation. The one thing you're most proud of from the last 12 months, personally or professionally. All right, when you're finished, go ahead and grab a seat, everybody. So share that one thing that you're most proud of, personally or professionally. All right, folks, go ahead and grab a seat. Go ahead and grab a seat. All right, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. How'd that feel? Amazing, good, right? Like, I noticed the energy in the room, pumped up, right? We shared something that we're most proud of, and you can't do that like this, like, oh yeah, I'm really proud of my kids' soccer practice, and like they won the big game, and I'm really stoked about that, and I'm really proud of my son, Jim, and I just can't say enough. No, that's not how it works. Right? Like you feel proud, chest out, you've got a smile on your face. It's positive. So I like to start out the conversation on a positive, and it turns out positivity is really important for being more innovative. So I'm gonna jump in and tell you a little bit more about who we are now that you all know somebody and have made a new friend and you talked about something positive. Just a question, who talked about something in their personal life that they were proud of? Okay. Majority. How about professional life that you're proud of? Well, actually, it's about half and half. That's cool, right? Like, it's one of those things that I'm a firm believer in bringing your whole self to work, right? So the idea that sharing those things, having a conversation, use that at your next meeting when you have a conversation, you're running a meeting, see how that goes. See if you don't have a better outcome from your conversation, starting out with that question. My gift, yours to keep. So a little bit more about us. So I work for a company called Peak Teams. And at Peak Teams, we were founded in the idea that adventures inspire performance. So it's a very interesting story. In 2002, we were founded in Sydney, Australia, by a first descent skier, a mountaineer, and a South African game ranger. You're like, where's the neuroscience? It's coming, don't worry. So these adventurers went out and filmed their epic adventures and came back and created experiences for people to learn leadership lessons. So the interesting thing is, about 6 years ago, I joined the company. We're a small company based in San Francisco in the Bay Area and in New York City. And so about 4 years ago, one of those founders got in a tragic skiing accident and sustained a traumatic brain injury. And at that time, I had just sort of started my road down understanding neuroscience and starting to study applied neuroscience. And so we've been through an interesting path, and his healing process has been inspirational for our team. But we essentially started to weave in the idea of understanding our brains better in that adventure world to create high-performance teams. So our team goes out on adventures and expeditions and looks at how we operate together as humans. And then I look at the neuroscience behind why is that? Why do we do that? And so that's actually a picture of me. So Tabitha and I have actually gone on an adventure fairly recently to the Arctic. And so we had a team of 11 who crossed Baffin Island, which is in the Canadian Arctic. And so we sort of mixed this really interesting mix of adventure and neuroscience to look at our performance as humans. So that's a little bit about our company. Me personally, just so you know a little bit about who I am, I'm the CEO, and I'm also what I'd like to call a neurofacilitator. So a neuroscience facilitator. I made my own job title up. Pretty cool. So I basically go around and talk to people about their brains and how to use the information about our brains to be more productive and effective and happier and healthier. So I talk about a lot of different topics, and I mostly spend time with technology companies. So I live in Silicon Valley. I live in San Jose. I went back to school, and I got an executive master's in neuroleadership, so the science of looking at our brains as leaders. And I focused on the neuroscience of innovation. I'm going to share some of my research and findings and ideas in a really, hopefully, fun and interactive way with you today. But I have a business background as well as a science background. So I try and blend the two together to make it practical and applicable. And the other thing is I'm a bit of a brain geek. So I found the science just really fascinating and amazing, and I went deep. I'm like, oh, this stuff's good. I want to go deep. I'm a nerd. Let's get into it. So I went so deep that I've got kind of a funny story about my outfit today. This is actually, a designer made this dress, and it's actually a functional magnetic resonance imaging, an fMRI scan of someone's brain. So it's a brain pattern. Like, I went real deep, like I'm a nerd. So I'm going to share some things about the brain today, but I'm also an adventurer. That's part of my who I am and my side. I like to go paragliding, mountaining. We're not going to talk about the mountains today. We're going to talk about the brain. So that's a little bit about me. Tabitha, why don't you tell the folks about you? They can obviously see what you do.
Hi, my name's Tabitha. I'm based out of New York City. I'm what's called a graphic facilitator. So basically, I just listen and capture what I hear. So you'll see this board come alive with color over the next hour. I'll then take a photo of it and be available for you as well. But it's a really good way to remember where we were and to capture high-level concepts as well.
Yeah, so we'll get you a copy of that. We'll give you an email address on a card that if you want to grab on your way out. If you want to send us a note, we'll send you a copy of that. So you can keep it, share it, pass it along. It's yours to keep. All right, so that's a little bit about us. And so what I'm going to talk to you today about is really thinking about, it's the neuroscience of innovation, but it's really how do we generate those aha moments, those ideas, those insights. And I mean insights from a neuroscience standpoint, not from a marketing standpoint for any marketing folks in the crowd. And how do we turn those into new ways to innovate? Like what happens in our brains? So I'm basically going to talk about a couple of things. A little bit more about your brain so you can walk out smarter about how that thing works. We're going to do a couple of interesting experiments around insight and those aha moments. And then I'm going to give you 5 ingredients to walk away with to engineer your day, your life, your work style to try and be more innovative. Does that sound good? Yes? Okay, you're glad you're here. Good. All right, so when we think about insights and innovation, in my studies, it's really fascinating because I'm like, how do these aha moments happen? Like, is it magic? Well, okay, this is where I'm going to get really nerdy. So magic and magic tricks play a part in how neuroscientists study the brain when it comes to aha moments. I was like, oh my God, if I couldn't get nerdier, like I'm now getting nerdier. I'm going to talk about magic tricks. And so it turns out there's a couple of different magic tricks that some of the neuroscientists were using to basically look at how people had those aha moments, those moments of insight, those moments of like, oh, I figured it out. Oh, this is how that works. And so they'd put people in the scanner, and they'd show them magic tricks. And there was that moment, that moment when you figure out a magic trick and you go, oh, I know how that works, that aha, that just sort of suddenly happens. They used that as a prompt to study what happens in the brain. So I'm going to show you a video of a magic trick. I'm not actually going to do a magic trick. I decided, you know what? I can't cross that line. I'm just going to show you a video of a magic trick of someone doing this trick. And this is the trick that caused the most aha moments. It sort of generated the most spark in the fMRI machine, in that machine, to look at people's brains. So have a look at this magic trick. If you know this trick or have seen it before, don't give it away to your neighbor, because we're going to come back to it. Just think about it, and if you have that aha moment while you're watching, just hold it tight. Don't spoil the fun for anyone. So here is a magic trick.
I'm about to explain you and perform one of the very, very first tricks I have learned when I was a little child. It's very, very easy. After you learn it, you can easily perform it for your friends or family. I'm sure they're really going to enjoy it. And it uses actually silk, just like this. In this case, it's a red one. And after you place it into your closed fist, just like so, very, very clearly, the magic is about to happen. Without any mirrors or trapdoors, you'll see it really happen, because when I snap my fingers, just like this, the silk, believe it or not, magically morphed into an egg. Thank you very much. I can see by your reaction that you are really enjoying the trick.
Okay, yeah, I can see by your reaction everyone has really enjoyed this trick. I can tell. All right, so think about this trick. Think about like, okay, what is it? How did it happen? What's he doing there? What's the catch? So we're going to come back to that for a second, a little bit later. But what I want to do is kind of dive into thinking about our brains and thinking about our brains when it comes to coming up with new ideas, good ideas. So I've got a quiz question for you. What I'd like you to do is think about, where do you do your best thinking? There was a research study done by the University of London, sponsored by HP, in 2006, which is a little while ago. And they basically looked at 6,000 workers. And they found a certain percent of them did their best thinking at work. So in this research study, what do you think is the percentage of people who do their best thinking at work? Is it A, 10%, B, 25%, C, 42%, or D, 57%? So think about that for a second. So what I want to ask you to do is, if you think it's A, 10%, please stand up for me. Wow, quite a few of you think it's 10%. All right, go ahead and have a seat. How about B, 25%? Go ahead and stand up if you think it's 25%. Okay, big chunk of you. All right. Wow, we're not getting anything done at work, are we? How about C, 42%? Who thinks it's 42%? All right. Very hard workers in the room. Go ahead and have a seat. How about D, 57%? All 6 of you are like, I get a lot done. I'm productive, right? So the answer is A, 10%. Woo, yay for those of you like, we're not productive at work. Yay! Think about what you're cheering for, people. This is terrible news. So that's sad, right? Part of it is our brains haven't caught up to the modern work environment, right? Our brains are still evolving, still developing, still sort of adapting to that idea that we're to go and sit in a gray cubicle and look at a screen all day and answer emails and sit on phone calls and multitask and do 12 different things at once. Our brains haven't caught up to that. That turns out where we really don't do our best thinking at work, except for those of you who said 57% who are getting lots of stuff done. You are the minority. Thank you. Thank you for your work. So where do you do your best thinking? Shout it out for me. Where does it happen? In the shower. Oh, who's a shower thinker? Okay, a lot of shower thinkers. So there's some really interesting studies around shower thinking. So I know it sounds weird because you never have a piece of paper to catch those ideas, right? That's frustrating. But shower thinkers. So the person who sort of turned me on to neuroscience actually wrote a book. So he's a marine biologist and a turtle researcher by trade. And he wanted to know, like, why does water make us so chill and so happy? He's like, this is an interesting question, because he spent all these years looking at turtles and water, and he's like, why does this make me so relaxed? And it turns out he asked a bunch of neuroscientists to write a book on it, and none of them would. They're like, yeah, we're busy. And so he decided to write this book himself. He's like, you know what, I'm going to study this. I'm going to look at this. I'm a scientist. And so it's a book called Blue Mind. It's really cool. His name's Wallace J. Nichols. But he basically looked at, like, what happens to our brain on water. And so it turns out our brains get really relaxed on water, and that's where good things happen. So when you're relaxed and calm, which you are typically in the shower, that's where good thinking happens. Where else do people have their best thoughts? Driving. Okay, so driving, right? So think about your driving, your regular commute driving usually, right? Like you're just going and you're on your way to work and you are not paying attention and your mind is wandering, right? Because you sort of are in autopilot. And then you get to work, you're like, oh my God, how did I get here? How did that happen? And oftentimes it's because you're very relaxed and your brain is on autopilot, so you don't have to think or stress if you've got one of those commutes. God bless you. I live in the Bay Area. We don't have that commute. It's always stressful. But like you get in that routine. And when you're in routine and in habit, your brain goes on autopilot for those behaviors. Anybody a runner? Anybody get their thoughts while running? Yeah, like running, exercise, that's another thing. So the endorphins you get through exercise and that time and space, and especially if you're outside, right? Good thinking happens there. So that comes into some of this research about where, and I'm going to talk about environment sort of toward the end, but thinking about where you do your thinking is important. So what I'd like you to do is have a quick conversation with a person next to you, kind of people behind you. How do you plan for this throughout your week? This might be a short conversation for some of you. So how many hours do you plan to come up with innovative insights, ideas? How many hours do you schedule and plan in a week? Have a 30-second conversation. I think I know how this is going to go, but share that with the person next to you. All right, seems like a lot of you are already done with this conversation. This is more, I think, of a prompt, right? So this is more of a prompt to say, like, okay, I should plan for this, I should make time for this, or I should at least like consciously think about how I plan to come up with insights. So how many of you, this is part of your job to come up with new ideas or solutions to problems? Pretty much everybody. So if we don't plan for it, if we don't think about it consciously, we're just expecting it to happen, right? Like we're just expecting it's going to pop up and off we go. We don't if we're not consciously thinking about it. So part of the idea here is to prompt you to think about, how do I build this into how I work and how I connect with others? Because, oftentimes you think about how we normally go about these things, and oftentimes it's your boss saying, hey, you grab 15 people, go in a conference room with a whiteboard, you got an hour, solve all of our problems, right? Like, does that happen? Yes. And it's really tough to come up with those good ideas with that time pressure, with that stress, with the fact that you've got 15,000 emails in your inbox. It's not where innovation happens. The workplace is not wired for us to biologically go to where we like to do our best thinking. So part of it is, how do you weave that in? How do you sneak in those hours during the week to give yourself that downtime? I'll give you some tips for that in a bit. All right. So just to think a little bit more about thinking and how we think. Basically, it's like, okay, so why are we going to talk about insight? Why does this matter? Well, part of it is really thinking about the fact that all of us have these jobs in which we are forced to come up with good ideas and solutions and ideas. So how do we do this? And really, it's a demand. And so I'm going to let you read this quote. We're making a shift. We're making a shift from knowledge work to insight work. And, I get it with AI and ML, sometimes the machines are doing this for us, but it's still a matter of we're in companies and organizations to really take the knowledge that's out there and the data and the information and turn it into something that's new and different and innovative, right? So thinking about there's a challenge in making that transition. We're moving from knowledge workers to insight workers. And so if our workplaces and our schedules aren't aligned to give us the time and space to do that, we're not going to come up with our best ideas. We're going to fall a little short. And so my focus is really thinking about, so how do we do this? How do we engineer this in our heads and in our spaces and in our weeks and our time to have more time and space to be able to do it? Because it doesn't happen on demand. Sometimes if you're really lucky, you luck out and it happens. But really, you can be more conscious of how you do that. So what is insight? So I want to define it for us and really give you a different way of looking at how you generate your good ideas. So number one, it's a solution that combines and recombines knowledge or information in a new way. Has anybody seen the movie Inside Out, that Pixar movie Inside Out? So I actually that's a neuroscience approved awesome movie for thinking about the brain. So I think it's great, and I think it's great particularly around its definition of how we store information, right? It's like a library. And essentially, you've got all these books in the library that fall in different places or about different things. Some have dust on them, some you haven't opened in a while, some of them you use regularly. But an insight is when you take that information and recombine it in a new and different and novel, unique way. It's the opposite of a roadblock, which I know sounds like a very strange way to define something, is telling you what the opposite of it, but here's the important thing, is that an insight, a true insight, a true new novel idea requires struggle. Requires a roadblock, a challenge, like a hump you have to get over. So it's a frustrating process. And so oftentimes, we get mad and we want it to happen right away. And that roadblock's really important because your brain needs that time to be able to come up with that new idea. The other piece is, what we found about insight is that it's not logical. It's kind of a sudden knowing. And it kind of goes back to the history. So when I looked at how this happens, I went way back to Archimedes and the first aha moment. So Archimedes was thinking about all kinds of theorems, and he ended up in the bathtub, and he displaced water and had the first aha moment of water displacement. I understand volume now. So thinking about that aha and those aha moments and where they came from, it's an aha. It's when your brain makes the connections that you've left dormant for a little while. And so that's an important piece that's going to come up in our tips a little bit later, is that you got to give it time and space to breathe, to think, to sort of permeate in your brain. So that's what insight is. So I want to give you a little bit of brain biology because there's some things about your brain that you can essentially hack to think about differently when you come up with how can I be more insightful every day. So a little bit of biology, I want to give you a very simple 3-part model to use. So everybody raise your hand, cover your thumb with your palm, and then cover your fingers over your thumb. So this is a handy-dandy model of your brain. This is yours to keep, free gift, me to you. Enjoy it. You can put your hands down because it's a very aggressive posture to take at me mid-afternoon. It's like you're coming for me. So essentially, this is just a 3-part model of your brain that you can think about when you think about your brain. So those 3 parts are functionally based, and this is an oversimplification of your brain. Your brain is actually the most complex thing in the known universe. This is just a simple thing to remember, a couple of things about innovation. The first piece is your habit function. So that habit function is basically represented by your wrist here, and it's where your habits are formed, to be obvious, but then it's also where your subconscious sits, and it's where things happen that are on autopilot, like that drive to work that you don't have to remember. That's autopilot. That happens in your habit function. It's how you get ready in the morning. It's, your route to work. It's how you respond to emails, how you run your meetings, things like that are in your habits. Good habits, bad habits, all that stuff you want to quit doing. It's all locked in your habit function. And that's also where your subconscious is. And your subconscious is weird. We'll talk about that in a second, too. The second piece is when you cover your thumb, that thumb piece that's sort of deep inside your brain, that's your emotional function. So those of you who did see Inside Out, what are the 4 key emotions? Shout them out for me. Anger, joy, sadness, fear. Very nice. Very good. So those are your 4 key emotions, and they all sort of happen in that crunchy interior center in your brain, that delicious chewy inside. And it's also where your memory and your judgment centers sit. So it's really interesting because the interplay between your emotional center and the next function is really key around innovation. The last piece is your executive function, which is sort of the rest of your brain. It's the biggest part of your brain. That executive function, or what I like to call the boss brain, it's your rational brain, your analytical brain, your creative brain. It's like where all the good stuff happens. It's your work brain. So here's the thing. Your emotional function, if sparked, if you're processing very strong emotions, which is the 4 key emotions at any level, it pulls resources away from your executive function. So here's the thing about innovation. You can't be scared or stressed out, afraid or angry to come up with a new idea. Can't. So when a boss says, get in a conference room, come up with something in 30 minutes, or we get a real problem, that's not good for innovation, obviously. But biologically, it's taking away resources because it takes a lot more resources to process your emotions than it does to process all the other stuff that's happening. And your emotional function's really greedy. So that's something to think about, is you've got to be in the right mindset to come up with new ideas. You can't be stressed out, you can't be panicked. And sure, sometimes you can do things under the gun, but is it your best possible quality work? Oftentimes, no. So all of you who procrastinate to the last minute and just wait till that deadline and then finally slam something in, there's a really interesting thing that happens. You're actually giving your brain time to marinate on things. Sometimes that stress is good, that sort of good stress, that positive stress, but generally, for great ideas, stress is not good for that. All right, so that's a little bit about your brain biology that I think is really helpful. A little bit more is thinking about the 2 hemispheres of your brain and how they work together. Who's heard like, oh, I'm left-brained or I'm right-brained? Who's heard that before? Okay, how many of you feel like, oh, I'm left-brained, I'm more left-brained? Okay, a couple people right-brained? Kind of? Okay, so here's just a breakdown of sort of the processes that center in these brain hemispheres. The good news is we're all brained. Like there's a lot of like bad movies around there, like, oh, you only use 10% of your brain, or oh, I'm only left brain. Like, no. Everybody uses all of their brain, just different parts for different functions. But that's good news, right? Like the cool thing about neuroscience is it's making us much smarter about a lot of the bad movies out there. So like Lucy is another bad brain movie. don't watch that one. It's awful. So, but it's basically like, yes, we use all our brains. This is cool. So the left brain essentially focuses on things like language, process orientation, logic, analytical things. So those processes happen more on the left side of your brain. And then your right brain is the center of your visual spatial cortex is there. It's more holistic and random in its processing. It's more where your intuition is based. And it's also where insight happens. It's where the good ideas happen. And so you might think, oh, I spend maybe more of my work life on that left brain. That's okay. We kind of joke, Tab and I joke, because I'm definitely a little bit more left-brained. She's definitely a little bit more right-brained. It's great. Together, we make a great combo. But essentially, where your preference is, that's okay. It doesn't mean you can't do the other one. And then there's something called the corpus callosum that communicates across the brain to kind of mix it all up. So the interesting thing, though, is that insight or new ideas happen where you would think in the sort of creative side of the brain, on the right side. And so it happens very specifically in a piece of the brain that I think is kind of fascinating in terms of the studies that I saw. So we're going to get super nerdy. I'm going to show you a proper brain picture. So let me break this down. This is an fMRI scan. Who's been in an fMRI before? Really fun time, right? Like if you're claustrophobic or don't like loud noises, it's not a cool time. It's really not fun. So essentially what they do is they put you in this tube, and then the magnets pull blood flow, and they measure blood flow. And you have to stay perfectly still when pounding loud sounds are happening, and it's uncomfortable, especially if you're claustrophobic. So they're not fun. Anyway, so this is basically a picture of a brain. And this brain, if you look, so this picture basically is looking top down. This picture is looking from the side. This picture is looking from the back. And so what this brain shows is the actual moment in space that an aha is happening, which is cool, because there's a couple of different, your brain basically runs on electrical waves and blood flow and a bunch of hormones and some chemicals. But basically, to be able to measure those aha moments, they looked at alpha waves, which are basically waves happening during rest, and beta waves and gamma waves. And gamma waves are basically those waves in your brain that happen when you're consciously thinking of something, when something pops into your consciousness. And so essentially they found when they did these fMRI scans, maybe it was of some of those magic tricks we talked about earlier, what happened was there's a piece of the brain about here, the anterior temporal gyrus right here, superior gyrus right here, and what happened is there's a rush of blood, because essentially all the information gets combined, and when you have an aha moment, there's actually a rush of blood into this part of your brain to sort of spark that aha. So I was like, well, that's interesting, fascinating. So there's actually a moment when you have an aha that there's a biological process happening. So cool, we have aha moments. They actually happen, they can measure them. So essentially it's like, okay, we've got that, what else? What else is happening in the brain now that they can measure this cool stuff? A couple of things. Number one is that you've got to have a resting executive function, or neocortex. So what this means is you have to be relaxed. So whether you're in the shower, you're on a run, you're in the car, you've got to be relaxed in order to have these insight moments. You have to be not in a stress state, not in a panic state. And so one of the best ways to get a resting neocortex is to daydream. So next time your boss catches you at your desk and you're sort of floating out into space, you're saying, hey, I'm actually generating insight here because I learned through neuroscience that I have to have a resting neocortex to come up with good ideas. I need to give myself that space, that time. I need to rest my neocortex. Please use that. Send your boss to me. Good times. The next piece is preparing brain. So the preparing brain is essentially your brain doing that work to assemble the books in the bookcase, right? Like, okay, we got to come up with an idea. We've got to assemble all the different books. Now, how can you do this more effectively? So here's the cool thing. If you expose yourself to information outside of your domain area, right? Like you spend a lot of time looking at networks. You spend a lot of time looking at code. You spend a lot of time sort of with data. Branch out. Go to an art museum, read a fiction book, talk to friends in marketing, right? I know, it's crazy. What? I know this is very controversial, but do things that are fully outside of your domain. Expose yourself to information that's new and different, maybe uncomfortable. But the idea is your brain will process lots of different books in this bookshelf, and they'll get more unique and innovative ideas. So I'm always a big fan of like, hey, talk to somebody in another function. Even better, talk to them about your specific problem and get them to think about it, because you're doing the same thing. You're having a useful exchange around like, hey, I'm trying to be more innovative. You might have a view of this that I don't have. And so that preparing brain feeds on different information. And so I personally am a weird example of this. So my undergraduate degree is in poetry. My parents were super stoked. They were like, what are you doing with that? So poetry, and then I went into business and got an MBA in marketing, and then now I'm looking at neuroscience. Like, it's a hodgepodge. So when I solve a problem, I've got a different perspective, and I go talk to an artist, right? Like, it's about looking at things well outside your domain, because you all have expertise, right? You wouldn't be here if you didn't have expertise, but part of it is broadening that lens to come up with new and different solutions to the way you're solving the problems that you have. And then last but not least, the other piece of the biology around when your brain comes up with a new idea is called sensory gating. So basically, your brain shuts down your 5 senses in order to generate the energy to come up with a new idea. And you can actually watch someone have an aha moment, which is really crazy, because what they do is you can tell they actually close their eyes. Or they look up and they look to the right, which looks this way for you. But they look up and to the right because their eyes actually veer toward that section of the brain that's having the insight, which is weird biologically. But basically, noises kind of mute out in the background. The visual cortex doesn't focus as well. Sense of smell dulls, as well as the sense of touch. Because your brain just says, like, nope, we need all hands on deck to come up with this new idea. So that also happens when you come up with a new idea. So if you pay attention to it, it's really fascinating, because you can see it in a meeting. If somebody's actually having a breakthrough or aha, they'll look up and to the right and they'll go, oh, eureka, I found it. And oftentimes it's, the light bulb comes up here, right? It doesn't come down here, it comes up here. So that's a little bit more about the biology of like what's happening in our brains when we think about insight. So when I learned all this, I was like, hey, cool, is there a way to engineer and do things that will help me do this more and do it more often? Turns out, yes, there is. And so one of the interesting ways they found to generate this muscle and to work on it and to kind of get it going and get yourself in the habit of coming up with new ideas is actually to do a puzzle. And there's a specific type of puzzle they use to study the aha moment, kind of like the magic tricks. But these puzzles, they found, really help people spend that time to come up with new ideas and to generate the feeling and the process of the aha moment. And they're called compound word associate problems. And so we're going to do a little experiment. So does anybody know what a compound word associate? You'll know it when you see it. So essentially, I'm going to give you 3 words. They're unrelated words. But if you come up with one word, it actually makes a compound word with each of those 3 words. So I'm going to give you a couple of these as an experiment. And so some of you in this room will be freakishly good at these. Like, there are some people on this earth that just get them. But they're all over the internet. You can use these puzzles yourself to sort of flex this muscle. So instead of going on Instagram every 5 seconds, like, do a couple of these puzzles, like, help yourself out a little bit. But we'll do one as a test, as a practice, and then we'll do a couple more. They get progressively a little harder. The last one's really hard. One of my colleagues is freakishly good at, like, frighteningly good. So I'm going to show you this, and all I want you to do is yell out the word when you know it. So here's the first one. Playing credit report. Card, boom. Like, how freakish was that? That was like instantaneous. Who said that? Rad. You're a freak. I love it. So that's it. So playing credit report. So that was the first one. That was kind of easy. All right, so now you kind of get it, right? Like, you get the gist of this. So we're going to do another one. Barrel root belly. Like, beer! Like, woo! We're ready to party! Like, not quite the after party yet, but yes, barrel root belly. Beer. Again, people are freakishly good at these when they're good at them. All right, this one, last one. Storm, wave, drain. Brain. Super quick, right? Like, it's fascinating because that's it. Brainstorm, brainwave, brain drain. So these are proven to sort of help you with that process of just getting the habit of coming up with new ideas, letting your brain kind of think about the aha and collect information and have those aha moments. So they use them to study, but you can use them as a process of working on them. And so when I was doing my research, it's really funny because if you are not sort of language gifted, you can struggle a little bit harder with these, which means you should do more of them. So, fun fact, my husband's an airline pilot, so he's a numbers dude and a checklist dude. Like, our whole life is based on checklists. Like, he goes to work, he runs off checklists to make sure everything's done. At home, we get a lot of checklists. And so he struggled, and I actually gave this last one to him and a pilot colleague, and it took him 2 days. They're like, I can't get it. I'm like, don't cheat, don't go on the internet, don't find it. It took him 2 days. He's like, I'm not language gifted. I'm like, it means you should do more of these. But these are really interesting ways to flex that muscle and find different creative ways, because there's some creativity involved, right, in thinking about it. And sometimes they come instantaneously, but sometimes they're like, oftentimes you'll think about a process. And so the difference between process orientation and aha moments, or where insight comes from, they're different. So how many of you are formally trained as an engineer? I know, this is a rhetorical question. I know where I am. I know it's like most of the room. It's okay, I get it. So oftentimes, you are very well trained in the idea of going through a process to find a solution to something, right? Like, that's how you're trained formally, is looking at step by step, let's break it down, let's look at and find an answer. And this is different from that. And some of you may have done the process of like plugging in different words to think about those compound word associates, right? Ahas are very different. Like I said, they're sudden. They take time, and they take you stepping away from the problem at hand. And process orientation to come up with solutions, not that it's not innovative, but it's really the idea of doing that logical step by step. Oftentimes you stay with that problem. You don't give it that breathing room that it needs to solve that challenge. So the aha is really sort of the core of it. So I want to come back to the magic trick. So stand up if you know the solution to the magic trick. You know sort of the answer to that magic trick okay, go ahead and stand up. So you know it, a couple of you know it, okay, at least you have a guess, solid guess. Okay, a handful of you know it already. So I'm going to show you the answer, but what's the answer? Those of you who know it? Okay, he's got something in his sleeve. The egg, so there's a hole in the egg, right? So let me just show you the secret to the trick, right? The aha. Did anybody figure it out sort of in that process, that time frame? Now it's like, no, I didn't have time. I was already thinking about all the brain stuff. So here's the aha of the trick. So I'll show you, and our magician's going to come back up and tell us
Hello,
how he
magical
solved
friends.
it.
Welcome to the amazing world of magic. This is the explanation of the classic silk to egg illusion. In order to perform this effect, you need an egg,
An egg.
a glass, a towel, and a silk.
I don't know where the silk is.
It's in the egg.
Here's the secret part. The silk is inside the egg. You don't need to be extremely clever to understand that the egg is fake. Here's how to perform the trick.
Yeah. So the silk's in the egg. So there's a hole in the egg. This guy, like magician, woo, magic. But this is essentially the trick that they use in neuroscience to get the most aha moments. So it's like, okay, you could process that out, but they found that when people sort of thought about it, stepped away from it, came back, that was the trick that people had the most ahas about, which is kind of interesting and really nerdy. So to shift this a bit, so we've talked a bit about our brains. We've done a little bit of an experiment in terms of how can you build that muscle. I want to give you some ingredients. I've kind of peppered them in throughout, but I basically want to give you the 5 ingredients through this research that you can experiment with yourself to be more innovative, to generate more of these insights. So the first one is pause. So when you have a challenge, when you have an opportunity to solve a problem, you've got something out there that you need to work on, step 1 is pause. Like, if you really want to come at it in a very different way, you've got to take a pause and step back from it and step away from it and give your brain time to process that. You can't rush insight. You can't rush innovation. It takes time. Oftentimes you hear a lot of innovators say, like, this is my life's work. I spent a ton of time working on it, and they've come back to it, back and forth, back and forth. You've got to have pause. You've got to have time for your brain to process. The next piece is a really interesting one. You've got to have quiet. So quiet is really important for your brain to function. And yet we've got so much media interfaces. And how many of you work in an open floor work plan at work? Yeah, not a lot of quiet happening there, right? Like struggle town. The idea of quiet, when you really want to come up and give yourself some thinking time, is critical. And so quiet allows your brain to process information better when you're trying to come up with ideas, because it's not processing background information. So noise and media, we work with a neurobiologist out of Stanford, and she studies sort of media multitasking. So those of you who kind of keep the headphones in with the tunes going all the time, you're actually pulling away from your ability to come up with more insight, because your brain's always processing something in the background in terms of the audio that you're listening to. So those of you who don't spend any time in sort of that dead quiet, or even like just white noise in the background, that can also help drown things out. But quiet's a really important piece of being able to come up with new ideas. The next piece is reframing, looking at something in a different way. And that's where talking to your colleagues in a different function can help. Helping you reframe or relook at a challenge or a problem that you've got in a different way is key to coming up with a better idea for it. And so instead of sort of looking at it one way through one lens, reframing it and thinking about it in another way with another perspective. Oftentimes, we do this and we sort of hammer and try and solve a problem without doing these things, but reframing it and asking someone, like, how do you look at the challenge that I'm facing? Like, how would you describe this challenge? And getting someone else's perspective on it can help you come up with different ways of looking at your challenge. The next piece, which is a good one, is around positivity. So like I said at the beginning when we talked about things that we were proud of, being in a positive mindset is absolutely critical for coming up with new ideas. Being, I don't like to say like Pollyanna positive, but thinking about things in sort of a realistically optimistic way is a nice way to frame that. And so part of it is, being able to be relaxed about it and have a positive outlook versus stressed out or angry about something is really key to coming up with a better idea or solution. Oftentimes that positivity allows you to achieve goals and be able to solve those problems faster. I'll give you an example. Who here has school-age children? Does anybody with their hand up struggle with getting those school-age children ready for school on time? Any struggles there? Yeah, the struggle's real. So the idea of how you frame their day with positivity, an important one. So think about it. They're getting ready for school. You're like, God, where's your pants? Don't be late. Have you got your lunch? We're running late. Come on, don't be late. Don't be late. Versus, have all your things ready to go, excited for the day. Let's be on time. You've basically changed the way that their emotional function works. Instead of sort of firing them up with oh God, I'm going to be late and where are my pants and what's happening? God, my parents are mad at me. You're setting them up for positivity. Try that experiment at home. That positivity opens up and frees up resources because you're not processing them in your emotional function because you're freaking out because you're going to be late for school. So that's number 4. Number 5 is time. Being able to revisit again and again. Take a couple of bites of the cherry, as they say. So revisiting a challenge or a problem or a concern over time, stepping away from it, coming back and revisiting it with a friend or two, talking it through with people. That's how insights and innovations truly happen, is being able to give it the time and space it needs. And I know we are very time poor, right? We got a lot of data and not a lot of time. Not a lot of space to do that. We've got back-to-back meetings. We've got emails that never stop. You've got to carve out the time and space to be able to revisit those things that are really important. So those are kind of the main ingredients, and I want to layer one more thing on top of it, and it's environment. So does anybody know this building? Fun fact, fun architecture quiz. Where is this? Italy? Yes. Who said Italy? Boom, it's in Italy. It's a beautiful place. So this is the St. Francis de Assisi Basilica in Assisi, Italy. Does anybody know why this building's so important? It's a good one. All right, I'm going to tell you a story. So in 1952, Jonas Salk was working on what? Polio vaccine. Thank you. So Jonas Salk was working on the polio vaccine. This guy worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Polio sucks, and so he wanted to cure it, and he spent a lot of time and a lot of effort working with his colleagues in Pennsylvania on a cure. And he was exhausted, and he said, you know what? I need a vacation. Even guys like that need a vacation. He took a vacation to this place. And so he went to Italy, and he was so inspired by this space and this architecture and this building and this place. I'm sure the food had something to do with it as well, but he doesn't say that. But the idea that he went somewhere so blue, so green, so wide open, he actually credits his trip because he came back and found the cure for polio, because he had the time and the space and the opportunity to relax, to recenter his thinking, to hypothesize on new things, to have a big picture think about what he was trying to do. There are a couple of things in your subconscious that are really important around your environment and your space. And so essentially, the idea is that if you change your environment, you'll change your brain and change your behavior. And there are a couple of really key things about the environment you're in, right? Like we don't do our best thinking at work, as we all now know. And so being outside, having high ceilings, being exposed to the colors blue and green have an impact on your subconscious and how you feel and how you think. So your brain actually processes high ceilings or being outside as like big picture thinking. Like, oh, I can think bigger because I'm not constrained by a low ceiling or a cubicle. So your environment that you actually do your thinking in is pretty critical to having good ideas. So those of you who go outside to have good thinking, right? Go for a walk, go for a talk with a colleague, with a friend. Get outside. Our brains work best outside and in motion, thinking about stuff. And so it's interesting because the Salk Institute for Biological Sciences is based in San Diego, right outside Torrey Pines. Has anybody seen the Salk Institute? So it's a beautiful building, right? Like it's a cool piece of architecture that looks straight into the sea. And it was inspired by Salk's trip to Italy. And so it's really interesting because it's not just a hypothesis. The Institute for Biological Sciences comes up with some of the best and highest hit target research around biology, but specifically around neuroscience. So some of the best research today is coming out of this environment that was created in a space for people to think and think great things. So if you think about where you do your thinking, it's really important to put yourself in a space that generates thought. And so, fun fact, Peak Teams has been partnering with Cisco and the Cisco Live planning team, who actually puts on Cisco Live for the last, 4 years now. And so we've given them these tips. And so the convention center you're in is no mistake. Like there's sunlight coming in and space for you to sit and think. And so part of it is, how do you engineer your experience to be able to provide yourself with the best case for you to think a little bit clearer and not be stressed out about it, and have the opportunity to be open and be able to come up with your best thoughts and come up with new innovations. So what, right? So how do I apply this information? So the idea is I've given you sort of a scattershot of an interesting way to think about your brain and how your brain thinks. And what I want you to do is think about, how do I apply this information? I'm definitely going to take, I didn't see a lot of hands up other than when I asked, but I know there's a bunch of these catch boxes around if we want to talk about some of the other things. But what I want you to think about is something really important. So I want to think, I've given you a lot of knowledge and information. I want you to turn it into wisdom. And wisdom is an acronym at Peak Teams. And it stands for what I say and do differently on Monday. So I realize that today's Wednesday. Work with me. Wisdo does not have the same sort of ring to it. But what do I say and do differently on Monday? Like what's the one thing that I take from this and actually use to apply to my life? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take 2 minutes, have a conversation with the people around you, because I've thrown a lot of cool brain stuff and weird brain stuff at you. Have a conversation. So what? What am I going to do with this? How can I apply this? What am I going to do differently? 2 minutes, have a conversation, and if you've got questions for me, we'll get some of those catch boxes around. So 2 minutes, over to you, have a conversation around what's your wisdom, around your brain and neuroscience for innovation. Over to you, have that conversation. It's okay, you're all friends now. right, we'll take about 30 more seconds. 30 more seconds. In the meantime, if you have a question, you want to dive a little bit deeper into something, we've got catch boxes around if you want to grab that. All right, we've got a question out front here. All right, heads up, everybody around, for the catch boxes are coming. Heads up. There we go. All right, just talk right into that bad boy.
All right. So a lot of times I'll have my innovation while I'm sleeping, and I'll wake up in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I run out to the desk and I write it down, and my wife's like, "Where are you going?" So is that, I don't know if that's like a normal phenomenon. Is it because I'm not allocating time during the workday that's happening?
So great question. So sleep is really important. So here's the cool thing. Number one, like put that pen and paper by your bed now so that you don't have to get up. It's really convenient. But here's the interesting thing. So sleep has an opportunity to consolidate all the stuff you've done during the day. So it's like your cleaning crew. So it kind of takes out the day's thoughts, and your brain shrinks when you sleep, just a little bit, but it basically consolidates information, and so that consolidation process is part of that. So when you do wake up with those aha moments at night, that's your brain just processing all the stuff that it didn't have time to process during the day and to regenerate those ideas. But yes, part of it is like, some of that happens naturally at night, but if you do carve out time, it'd be interesting to experiment with it and say like, oh, if I actually spend time while I'm conscious, maybe some of that stuff won't wake me up in the middle of the night and I'll get better sleep, because sleep is super important. If you're not getting 8 hours of sleep, this is just a fun fact, the first 4 hours of sleep is for sort of physical cell restoration. The last 4 is for your brain. So if you're regularly skimping on those 8 hours, 8-ish hours, like bad idea, because you're shortchanging your brain more so than your body. So that's something, just a fun tip for you on how to live better with your brain. But those last 4 hours, very important. So if you're skipping out or shortchanging, or if you're only getting 4 hours of sleep and wondering why you can't think clearly, that could be part of it. Another question. Was there another question that popped up? Couple other ones coming in. Let's get the catch boxes down. Get our throwing arms ready. Right here.
So my work environment is pretty noisy. I mean, it's open, everybody's there, and people talking all the time. People like to be expressive. And so I brought it with HR, with the yearly surveys we have. This is one thing I want to change.
Yeah.
So how can I really scare them? Like what, on top of this research, like what else can I bring to them?
How do I strike fear into the real estate planning people? So great question.
How do I really
how do you change
make
that?
A point? Yeah.
So oftentimes, and this is a super controversial thing. I have this conversation at many organizations that I go to and have this chat with, because yes, the modern work environment is a tough one, and everyone went open plan because it's really good for collaboration. Well, that's only one part of your job, right? Like, you don't have to collaborate 100% of the time. And so part of it is, in the short term, like, yes, keep speaking out, and the real estate people are going to hate me, but keep speaking out and say, we need to also have spaces to do quiet, thoughtful work. So in the meantime, don't do all your work at your desk, right? Go find a conference room. Go hide in a stairwell. Go outside. You shouldn't be sitting at a desk 8 hours or 9 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours a day. Does everybody know that? I hope you do, if this is a newsflash, but don't. So move, like get up, move, and find spaces and apply the right space for the right work. Collaboration some of the time, sure, you got to talk to people, but that's not your whole job all the time. None of us have that job all the time. So going and finding places, even if you have to hide, let people know where you are, otherwise bosses get mad, but say like, listen, I need some quiet time. I'm going to go spend an hour in a conference room by myself thinking. That's okay, right? Like, that's what spaces are made for. And so that idea of breaking that barrier and saying, like, listen, we need more space for quiet. Now, sitting in an office the entire time by yourself isn't good either, right? So it's about finding the right space for the right work that you're doing and applying and matching that. But having that conversation and keep asking for that, really important, because open space isn't going away, right? Like, people love it, it saves money, all that good stuff. But being able to take control of how you work, I think, is something that we all have the liberty to do, because no one's shackled to their desk, right? But the idea of like moving around is really key. So there's another question over here. Yeah, right here. And then can we have another one over here? There's another question over here, too. So let's keep the boxes going.
Thank you.
Hi.
First, I didn't know I was a neuroscience nerd until just now.
Oh, good.
So
Welcome to the club.
Where can I buy Brain Fashion? Is my first question.
Yes.
But one of the things that I've been looking into is how people with things like chronic migraines and whose brain doesn't function exactly what people would consider normal, and how that affects how they're creative. And if we can't go into it, you can tell me. That's a whole nother session.
No, it's a good one.
Curious.
Yeah. Okay, so first off, this is from Beta Brand. It's no longer offered, but I have someone that's making me new brain dresses. So that's where you get brain dresses. They're out. I asked them to make more. It's interesting. So dealing with migraines, mental health issues. Mental health is going to be the biggest health concern in America in 2020. That's the stat I've been seeing. I think it's going to come sooner than that. Mental health and issues, migraines, health concerns, yes, it of course has an impact on how creative, and because you're not at your best. Personally, working with someone who's had a traumatic brain injury that 4 years later is still healing from it, he has bad days. He can't work a full 8-hour day. Like, you have to be gentle with yourself and not so demanding, because your brain can't function like a computer, like a machine. I think that's the short answer, is being able to take those breaks and being easier on yourself around that, because if you are mad about it or frustrated by it, it only generates more of that emotion that pulls away from those resources. So it's kind of this spiral. So it's, hey, I'm going to step back. Like, my brain's not at its best. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to take one more question over here because my time is just about up. So over to you. Over. Can I hear you better if you hold the box up to your face?
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Got a question. You mentioned earlier that in the presentation that you have worked with Apple and HP and some of these other organizations. So I'm curious to see what has been the result of those discussions, what kind of changes have taken place in the workplace, and what sort of like crossing the chasm, what sort of initiatives have been taken that perhaps we can take back to our workplaces?
So I spent a lot of time talking about individual behavior change, because I know telling a company, like, here are the best practices, here's what you should be doing, like, they won't just take it. So I spent a lot of time talking with leaders at those companies, particularly at the manager and above level, to say, like, here's how you use your brain better, here's how you communicate more effectively, because the innovation piece is only a small piece of the stuff I think about with the brain. And so a lot of it is, I focus on, at scale, how can I reach as many people who are working with other humans as possible? Like, I don't necessarily go top down, although a couple organizations I am working at the C-suite level, and it's about behavior change. So I spend a lot of my time talking about the behaviors you can set up at work to be more productive and effective, and how you communicate, how you connect, how you collaborate, how you work together, how you resolve conflict. And so do some of it in that adventure space too, but essentially have worked with these companies to put in leadership development programs, because that's sort of the standard word for it, but it's really thinking about, how do I apply my behavior differently so we can be more productive and effective as individual leaders and managers, because it's really hard to, like, get a whole company to make that shift. So I like to focus on lots of groups of individuals. Does that answer your question? And I want to do more of it, because I feel like it's really important, and we've got so many habits ingrained with us that aren't as brain friendly as they could be. So I just want to say thank you for a fun hour of chatting about the brain. There are these little wisdom cards so you can write down what you took from the session. And if you'd like a copy of Tabitha's rad artwork, because I'm always surprised when I finally look back at her and I'm like, wow, that's cool. She's got that, and she'll clean it up and actually send it to you if you send us an email at engage@peakteams.com. These cards, they'll be handing them out on your way out. But thank you very much for a fun session and a fun hour. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Amy. Tabitha, thank you so much. And I can tell a lot of you are going like, okay, now I know why my brain feels like it's going beep. You probably didn't get a full 8 hours of sleep last night.